Welcome back, everybody. I'm Sarah Imond, ICER's President and CEO, and it's really my pleasure to be able to facilitate a conversation over the next 90 minutes or so where we'll dive into some of the votes that we just took, some of the discussion that we had, and really look towards how we can build policy around the evidence that we have for this new medicine. I really want to emphasize something I said in my opening. This is an incredibly critical time for our healthcare system. There is an affordability crisis, and we have an obligation, all of us in our different roles that we play, to be focused on how we're improving the affordability of our healthcare system while still centering patient access. And I'd like to talk about how those things do not have to be mutually exclusive, that we can do both. And so that's going to be some of the energy that we bring to the conversation today. I also want to acknowledge how grateful I am personally that Phil from Takeda is here representing the manufacturer perspective, because that perspective is critically important as we think about these issues around affordability and access. And so with that sense of shared responsibility, I'm very excited to introduce the members of our policy roundtable today. So on the next slide, you've already met Tammy from the Wake Up Narcolepsy group. You've met Emily, a person living with narcolepsy and a patient advocate. We're joined now with Becky from United Healthcare and Emily from Premera, as well as Phil, who you heard from earlier from Takeda, and Louis and Tom are outstanding clinical experts who've been offering a lot of perspectives today. So we can take down this slide. We can start seeing everybody joining us for this conversation. Again, my thanks for everyone for being here. One of the things we always like to start with is a conversation around health equity. But before I do that, I am going to invite Tammy and Emily to reflect a bit on their experience being with us so far today, because I know how incredibly wonky and nerdy we can get, and that we can start talking about p-values and confidence intervals and utility measures. But I think it's really important that as we go into this conversation together, that you have an opportunity to start us off. What would you like us to know? What do you want to reiterate about what we've talked about today from both the patient perspective, the caregiver perspective, as we start talking about the ways that policies can be centered on access for patients? And so, Tammy, let me start with you.
Thank you, Sarah. This has been an honor to be here. Thank you for including us. And the ICER team has been incredible to allow us so much space and representation during the sessions today. And the CEPAC members have offered very thoughtful questions, and I feel that the deliberation was very intentional, so I appreciate that. I have two thoughts that have come up throughout the session today. First, just to the point that your reminder at the beginning of this about the healthcare system, and I personally, that is an issue. I'm not sure how we fix it, but what I see that we can do is support more treatment options for a group of individuals who have the potential to contribute to society in a greater capacity, but have been limited by this debilitating disorder, and remove them from the class that we currently consider as a burden to the system. My second thought is Emily and Louis live with narcolepsy. They've been with us all day. I would lean towards them and ask, how have you been able to get through this day? What have you had to do differently? Are you going to make it? How does this look? Because you're living with narcolepsy, and this is an incredible ask for you to be on this meeting for this amount of time. And I am so grateful for your representation and participation today.
I am handing over moderating duties to Tammy because she is doing an excellent job of doing this. But Emily, why don't you share what you want us to know and anything you want to reflect back to Tammy's great question?
Sure. Yes. How has today gone? I sit in on medical advisory board meetings often as the writer. I get to be the fly on the wall listening to smart people talk. And so it's been different to be a participant, but I do appreciate the opportunity, and I feel a burden for sure representing our patient population. I'm one person, but
Mhm.
I interact with a lot of individuals with narcolepsy and hope that today our combined interests are represented. I feel like the whole the what is happening is a little bit ambiguous from my perspective. So I've kind of been like, I mean, my goal is for everyone to have access to these meds that I know are life-changing. And I have
Right.
been unsure, like, what do I share? What do I not share that will lead to patient access? And so we kind of highlighted some of the issues that already exist with getting um, expensive medications for a rare disorder. And um, I would be terrified to place any roadblocks that are not already there, you know. So my hope is that all of this deliberation is only going to bring down barriers to access. And I've made it through by standing when I need to stand because I do get and I didn't share in my comments. I'm not on the I got off of the study medication even though there was an open label, and that's because um, the monotherapy was not enough, and so it was a very difficult decision between oxybates and continuing on the therapy, but
Mhm.
because of the dosing and the limitations of the times of day. And so I'm back on my regular meds, which does mean napping every day and standing when I'm at an all-day meeting.
Okay. So you've been standing up before, and Tammy, I appreciate we're going to invite Lewis to wear a couple of different hats during this conversation. But Emily, I'm not going to letting you get away that easy because you teased us with it's not about catching up on your Netflix shows, but I want to know what Netflix shows you are going to catch up on if it means you can, binge things in the evening. Any plugs? With anything on the list that you want to make sure we all
We
have on our list?
we don't even have a subscription.
So, okay. So now we're going to be talking about sort of the economic impact of the streaming services who may see an uptick in subscriptions with successfully treated narcolepsy. Okay, we're going to put that as one of those benefits beyond health. Lewis, what would you like to share, if anything, about making it through today?
Well, making it through today, I definitely go to Costco a lot and buy a lot of Red Bull, and so that helped. I definitely took a short little nap during the 10 minutes. I'm fortunate that sometimes short naps really help.
Yeah.
Even even I wasn't actively aware of falling asleep, but you know what? I put my head down and I felt better. So that tells me that I actually fell asleep. And then going back to my MSLT. When I first got diagnosed, I told the sleep tech, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you're not getting any good data because I didn't fall asleep." And they're like, "No, you fell asleep." It's like, that's when I was like, "Uh-oh, this is." I was up until that point, I wasn't even quite believing in the narcolepsy diagnosis, but the fact that I did fall asleep without realizing it kind of told me what was up. But going back to things, how I'm accommodating this meeting is I'm putting off a lot of my work until tomorrow, the weekend to catch up. And so while I would love to spend time with my family or getting my own personal projects done, I'm going to use a lot of my free time catching up on work so that I don't fail my patients. And unfortunately, with my current medication regimen, I do that more often than not.
Got it. Got it. I really
So
appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Tammy, I saw you. Did you want to, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to chime in with something on that?
I was just going to mention that I saw Dr. Ortiz's drinks during the meeting, and I was cluing in that this is a strain. So and we are grateful to the ICER team. I know Emily and I had a conversation about how to get through the meeting, and they listened very well. So thank you.
Absolutely. And if at any time anyone needs to go off camera to take a break, you do so. Whatever accommodation we need over the next period of time. Tom, I see your hand. Please chime in.
Yeah, so, I just want to expand a little on something Tammy said, and I think this is baked in somewhat to your economic analysis. But, narcolepsy, typically begins during the teenage years, and it completely affects people's life trajectory. You know, You have kids who, academically start doing poorly, or people who are getting criticized by their boss because they can't stay awake at work. And, when you just, really think of what Emily was saying and how we can see such improvements in alertness and mental focus, I really see this as a very hard to measure but important quality of life issue because, it really enables people to lead fuller lives and it gives them more purpose, because the more they can contribute, like right now, people with narcolepsy literally count their energy each day and say, what do I have to give up to get through the day? And to sort of feel like that they can really give as much as other people, I think is really huge. And it really puts them in a better position. Sorry, I'm getting poetic here, but like to make the world a better place and just have more purpose. And that whole, I think that ability of just to be your best self is really hope. I hope for that.
Those vibes are most welcome for this conversation. So never apologize about lofty goals for what can be achieved. Because I said this at the beginning, and I mean it, that we are fortunate to have an innovation ecosystem that is bringing forth the medicine that is addressing the underlying cause of a condition. There are so many meetings that we hold where the medicine is nibbling at the edges. It's maybe going around, and I'm looking at our payer colleagues who are here too, because I know that they see this when they're doing their reviews, maybe helping some symptoms, not diminishing how important it is to have innovation that's doing that. But Takeda gets to take a bow. This is a drug that's addressing the underlying cause. I think the upside potential here is pretty big. The productivity impacts, the life trajectory, the things that are really hard to measure. Well, I mean, you can measure how many kids you have, but I get Emily's point from earlier just about what decisions people are making about building their families. And so I think we want to keep that. And then, so here we are. Let's talk about how we make sure that this is going to be affordable and accessible. And so what responsibility do we all have from the different perspectives to do that? Let's move to the health equity questions just a little bit to get some perspectives from everyone on that. And then we'll dive into any reflections on the votes and then some of the policy conversation, like the nitty gritty of the coverage policies. Here are a couple of things that I heard throughout the day that I think we want to highlight when we're talking about obligations to address equity. We have problems with diagnosis. We have problems with access to specialists. We need more research in pediatrics, which I know we're going to put Phil on the spot a little bit on that a little later, but we're going to talk about then research needs as well. Insurance access and insurance benefit design, co-insurance, deductibles, prior auth, and the ways that is impacting sometimes also impacting disproportionately people who've already historically been underserved by the ecosystem. Accommodations needed for disability, addressing stigma. I'm going to throw this open. I'm going to put everyone on the spot for how they're thinking about one or two of these. And again, solutions oriented. What can we do around this issue? Phil, actually, let me start with you because I know that you've been thinking about and you spoke really eloquently today earlier about the totality of this condition, the things that are impacted by having narcolepsy that are harder to measure. Of our health equity goals that I've listed or other ones that are on your mind, Phil, what would you like to add to our conversation about, yes, we really need to be working on stigma. We want to be working on insurance design. Do you have a top issue here that you want to make sure that you chime in on?
Boy, there's so much to potentially go at there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot we're interested to contribute to help solve from
Great.
a Takeda perspective. One thing that was mentioned, but maybe deserves a little bit more airtime, is just the diagnostic pathway.
Great.
There's, as mentioned, I think Lynn mentioned it, the 10, 15 years to eventually land upon a diagnosis, to find a specialist, to have the appropriate tests and to get diagnosed. It's an area that we've already started to invest in. We've been working with some outside academics. We've communicated some work that we've been doing with some smart up tech companies and data AI groups to be able to help identify potential triggers in medical records and potential diagnostic tools to help with diagnosis. So, and not everybody, because not everybody's able to get to a specialist within the time that they want. And there's a pathway that they go where they're treating symptoms before they can get to that full diagnosis. So we're hoping to put a dent in that. It's going to take some time, some commitment, some dollars, some research to be able to get there. But that is something that I would like to state that we're definitely seeking to put our fingerprint on.
That's perfect, Phil. Thank you. Tom, let me go to you. Equity-wise, from your practice, of the issues that we've talked about, or ones that you want to make sure are on our radar that we highlight in our report.
So when you say equity, are you referring to access to medicine?
It can be across the board, access to diagnostics, specialists, medicine, insurance barriers, things that we see that potentially disproportionately impacting people from, go on.
Well, yeah, I think that starting with the diagnostic part, for years we've wanted to try to improve the ability of primary care doctors and pediatricians to diagnose narcolepsy. And I think that's almost an unreachable goal. They have too many other things in their mind. It's too uncommon a disease. And so by developing other methods, as Phil mentioned, where somebody has a sleep study and it shows some sleep apnea, but you know what? There's a signature in there that they actually have narcolepsy. That kind of thing where you can actually help clinicians who don't know a lot about narcolepsy actually get a little red flag. And, if we could come up with easier ways to diagnose it based on other stuff, smart devices and things like that, that would all be really, really good, because it's too long a path to getting that initial sleep study and multiple sleep latency tests. And even then, the tests aren't great. And so better diagnostic methods are certainly a high priority. And then in terms of medications, we've already talked about how the current meds are pretty good, but they're not great. And here I feel like we have a medicine that gets people to a very high level of function. And so I'm really eager to make sure that there's not too much friction to get them there. Because again, if you're talking about a 16-year-old who's bumming out of high school and you have to step through 3 medicines, including some that are potentially troublesome, like, maybe this kid's going to end up on a high dose of Ritalin, and then who knows what's going to happen. If we could make it so that it would be easier to actually get to orexin agonists faster, that would be really nice. Now, I'm not too. My guess is these are going to be stepped, right? We're going to have to go through a few things, but if we could make that it's a faster process, it would be great, because with other comparably expensive medicines, you have to fail a couple meds prior, but failing each med takes months, and so to fail 3 meds before you go to an orexin agonist takes a year, and that's a year of high school.
We're definitely going to talk about step therapy, because we want to talk about the sort of ethical guardrails around how one could just design utilization management, because we don't want to pretend that this is going to be a situation where every insurance company is going to give access without utilization management. We're just like refer back to, we have an affordability crisis. We can have a long conversation about the appropriateness of step therapy and utilization management, especially for people with a rare condition, to try to manage affordability. But, here we are. So we're just going to acknowledge sort of where we are. So we're definitely going to get back to step therapy. We're going to talk a little bit about our fair access criteria and how one could do that in a way that is most ethical. But Louis, I wanted to give you a chance, both clinically and as a patient, just sort of thinking about any health equity considerations, questions that you want to put on the table for this conversation.
Exactly. It comes things like co-pays, or sometimes you can the insurance will approve it, but you're still on the hook for a lot of things. So sometimes having the extra support from patient assistance programs can go a long way. I remember when I was a medical student, my insurance plan I could see any doctor I wanted in the medical system, but there was no prescription drug plan. This was before the Affordable Care Act. And if it wasn't for Nord, I would not have been able to start Xyrem. And because of that, I was able to start it without having to pay for it. And so having some kind of system in place to catch the people that don't have coverage for it is going to be really important, because you'll have a lot of people that their lives can be ruined without having access to this medication. I know I certainly wouldn't have been able to go through medical school
Louis, do you want to
without
say what
my
NORD?
medication.
You want to say what NORD
No,
is?
National Organization for Rare Diseases, and they offer a lot of support for for a lot of people with rare diseases. I feel like a lot of the medical access assistance that they provided for narcolepsy is not so much anymore, because I think a lot of the pharmaceutical companies that make various narcolepsy medications offer very robust patient assistance programs
Yeah.
nowadays.
Liz, I appreciate that. And the role that patient advocacy organizations play, connecting people to the resources that are available. And this is where I'm going to do my sort of high and mighty, which is it's also a real bummer that that has to be part of the system. Because we have a system of benefit design that does this inordinate cost sharing, especially with people with chronic conditions. Many people have heard me say this before. When we're asking people with chronic conditions to keep premiums low through coinsurance and high deductibles, it's literally the opposite of health insurance, which is asking healthy people to contribute so that people with conditions can get access. And I worry about the equity implications of some of that, because you have to have a certain amount of privilege to know how to navigate that, to know to go to these organizations and things like that. So we appreciate, and it is sort of a symptom of a problem, and we're glad it's out there, but let's not pretend that that is the solution that we want. I think we want a system where there's sort of a fair price, fair access, grand bargain that might de-escalate some of that cost sharing. So Emily and Tammy, to you, equity wise, wait, I think I already started with both of you guys, and now I've forgotten if I've asked you specifically about equity or not. Please forgive me. I know I haven't asked Becky and Emily yet, which is coming. But Tammy, did I ask you to weigh in on the equity and your priority there yet? I don't think so.
I made some comments, but I don't think we addressed this specifically.
Thank you. Please, Tammy, continue.
Of course. Coming from patient advocacy, I think the big thing for me is always going to be education and awareness for the public setting and a clinical setting. But the role that industry can play in this is so much bigger than a patient advocacy organization. The reach, you have industry partners going into doctors' offices and being able to bring the medications. They have access to providers that we don't. And we were talking about, that diagnosing and treating and educating our clinical side. Industry is going to be able to do that at a different level than we are. We'll work together to do that, but that's certainly something that we rely on their support for, as well as large media campaigns that we are not able to run, social media ads, things that come into people's feeds. Because if you're not seeing the symptoms we see so much good education coming from industry partners who are saying, here are some symptoms of narcolepsy, right? Our reach is pretty limited. Once people come to us, we do a great job, but we are not able to reach masses of people. And to Dr. Scammell's point, your primary care physician may not recognize it and may misdiagnose this, but if somebody can come into a clinic setting saying, I have these 3 symptoms, I wonder if I might have narcolepsy, then we can get through the diagnostic loop, a little bit faster. So those are just a couple of things that I thought of as we were having this discussion.
Great, Tammy. Emily, for you.
Yeah, I appreciate what Tammy said. I think education and awareness at the level of the patient, at the level of clinicians, even specialized clinicians, and more primary care, and then public, right? Like narcolepsy is so misunderstood, and that might decrease the equity issues that we have. And then I don't know like who has a hand in this, but it seems like sleep is pretty small as far as specialists go. And I don't know how you incentivize people to go into sleep. And I don't know if industry can play a hand in that. But that's a big barrier, just like having one in proximity for patients to have access to. But if there were, 2 or 3 times as many sleep specialists, then I think we'd be improving pace to a diagnosis.
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, Tom, did you want to chime in on that?
So we've got dozens of sleep medicine doctors here in Boston, but I was talking to a patient earlier this week who lives in Idaho, and she has to go to Salt Lake City or Seattle to see a sleep specialist.
Yeah.
And so we'll call it sleep medicine deserts.
Yes. Yeah. And then we've heard this from other reviews that we've done, especially when diagnosis and management is best left to a specialist because the condition might be rare. And it's really just the specialists in that particular field who've even seen patients before that we do have these deserts. We'll put something in there about expanding the pool of providers and all that. I'll probably recommend something in there about the role of telehealth and technology in this way. I know people need to like go to do a sleep study. However, the interpretation, as Tom was referencing earlier, and where technology might help us be able to expand access that way. Emily and Becky, I want to give you a chance to chime in. Thank you for being here. I know you were listening to part of the meeting today. If there's anything health equity wise that's kind of bubbling to the top from you based on this conversation, I'd love to hear it. Becky, I'll go to you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, just first quick introduction. I'm Becky Foshin. I'm a clinical pharmacist at United Healthcare, where my primary focus is on formulary management and clinical program development. So I'm very happy to be here today and just want to thank everyone for all of the wonderful insights so far. As you know, I'll say my focus on formulary management, clinical program development, when I think about equity, I think, the lowest cost is always going to provide the greatest access to medications. When I think about equitable access to medications, that starts with clinical coverage policies that are grounded in the clinical need and aren't creating unnecessary barriers for folks to gain access. So what is helpful from my perspective is just having the evidence available to understand who is the right person for this medication so that we can draft our clinical programs to filter those medications to the right person.
Thank you, Becky. Emily.
Sarah, I'm still thinking about your comment about the impact of, the benefit design, which is usually a different side of the house than what Becky and I sit on. But, I wonder if this is the report to make a general reminder to the employers that read your reports about, because, they would have a particular interest in this condition where it directly has an impact on their employees' ability to be a functioning employee in their company. And so, high deductible health plan or not, co-insurance, co-pays, like a lot of those decisions, happen pretty quickly on the employer side. And, I don't know if it's as widely understood as it probably should be about the impact that those decisions have on chronic conditions and the people with chronic conditions. It's not really, in my experience, a top priority for the consultants or the producers that they work with to really highlight that. And so I wonder if maybe this is the report to really put that plug in there for the employers that are reading it.
I am going to take that and run with it in terms of what we're going to sort of highlight. And it's an opportunity just for like a moment of education for people who might be participating, listening in today who aren't quite familiar with this. Often the benefit design decision comes from the purchaser of the health insurance, not from the health insurance company themselves. And so this is a really interesting part of our system where most of us get our healthcare from our employer, and very large employers are making those decisions. And then, I was talking earlier today about the pressure that a lot of companies are feeling to offer affordable insurance. One way that the actuaries get the math to work is to say if you offer a high deductible plan, you don't have to raise premiums so high. And that kind of, sucks. And it's a reality of the system that we had. It doesn't mean we have to keep doing it that way. And so I appreciate that you're right, given the impact and again the energy that Tom was introducing to sort of the way that we can be improving the lives of patients with narcolepsy potentially with this new therapy and the impact that can have on productivity, on family life. Employers should care about that. So thank you, Emily. We'll make sure that we highlight that. All right, we're going to shift to talking and just reflecting on the votes, just to give an opportunity. We go through those votes kind of quickly. Some of our roundtable members weren't active participants in that. So this is an opportunity to say, oh, I liked that one. I didn't like that one. Just a quick kind of run through here. We definitely heard from our panel that there are obligations to this community given the unmet need. And I was happy to see those votes come in with the high numbers there. There also was an acknowledgement of the stigma and the disability and some of the other sort of aspects of having this condition that mean we have particular obligations to make sure there's affordable access to these therapies for patients. We saw the clinical evidence votes for me were not terribly surprising, given that the trial was versus no treatment. We saw a unanimous vote there that there's absolutely enough evidence to say there's a net health benefit of oveporexton versus no therapy. A little bit more skepticism versus some of the existing treatments. And I think that comes from the fact that it's indirect comparisons that we had in order to sort of inform some of those conversations. And so I wasn't terribly surprised by some of those votes. They were all majority yes, is my takeaway from all of the comparator questions there, which I think is an acknowledgement of the biological plausibility here, right? A drug that's addressing the underlying cause of narcolepsy should be representing a net health benefit over drugs that are treating symptoms. And then as we think about benefits beyond health, the potential impact for caregivers and for families is absolutely clear there, as well as some of the quirks that come with the existing therapies here for stimulants and scheduled medicines and safe handling, and not having to get up in the middle of the night. I think that our CEPAC absolutely reflected that back from hearing from all of you today. So Tom, yes, please, any reflections on the votes today? Anything we didn't touch on that you want to make sure, please?
I thought it was interesting how in the comparisons to other medicines, the votes kind of drifted.
That they did.
And I felt like as people talked about it more, they were like starting to come around to yes votes. And that if you actually asked, I think it was the modafinil one first. Yeah, I think if you would ask that again at the end, you might have actually gotten different numbers.
That was not lost on me either. I did see that as people were sort of understanding the interpretation of the indirect evidence. Phil, please go ahead. You're on mute still, Phil.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I don't want to sound ungrateful because I do agree with the votes in regards to being generally positive. Some of the comments in regards to not having the evidence base versus combination, it's a challenge for us, right? I think Dr. Ortiz, you mentioned a little bit some of the challenges in regards to setting up a phase 3 program and how we do these particular studies to really look at the true benefit of the medication in which is being investigated. And even when you look back at some of the studies that were done with the oxybates or pitolisant, in some of those studies, they did have patients which were on concomitant therapy in those studies. So now, granted, you may see a little bit of a weakened delta because they were on something already. However, you're looking at the end net benefit and how many patients actually got to that normalization of the different measures that were actually looked at. So, the fact that the combination of modafinil and venlafaxine we don't have a comparison there. Well, I would argue that the evidence around venlafaxine, even as stated within the guidelines, is insufficient or maybe a little bit inconclusive, although it does sound as if from a clinician perspective, you do use antidepressants for cataplexy specifically. But net, when doing these comparisons, it's still really hard, right? We're choosing an endpoint or two endpoints to be able to do these comparisons too. So we need to be mindful that this disorder is not just one or two endpoints. It's a clustering of numerous symptoms which lead to downstream kind of functional impacts for patients. So, in a perfect world, we would have a setup where we have all of the comparators against all of these different measures set up the same way. But really, unfortunately, medicine just doesn't happen that way. So, we need to do the best that we can with the evidence that we have to support the decisions to make for patients. So, sorry, I'm going to keep going here a little bit to get my points in, but
no, keep going. You're good.
The other part was, around not having the publications out. So
Mm.
we're at a tough point here, right? We just finished the phase 3 studies. We've filed with the agency. We're working diligently in communications with the agency and answering, what's needed, the back and forth there. We're also working on the publication. Want to get it in a high-tier journal, just like we did the phase 2 in the New England Journal. So there's a lot going on here. We can expect that to come out before the end of this year, hopefully before we get the product onto the market and people can dig in as much as they want and all the tables, figures, and graphs that they want, in regards to the appendices for all of the evidence that's out there. But I would also kind of key in, as I did before, that there's going to be some more evidence that's coming out presented in the months
Right.
to come. So.
Great, and we appreciate that, and that's a critical part. But going back to your other comment, I couldn't agree more. Like there is always going to be a tension between the evidence that's generated as part of a registration regulatory packet versus the evidence that patients and clinicians need to make decisions in the real world. That's just it's not a bug, it's a feature. Well, I guess it can be kind of both. But this is one of the reasons we have this meeting is how are we bridging that gap? Where can we rely on indirect evidence? Where are the testimonials from patients helpful as payers think about coverage policy, clinical expert opinion about the role in therapy because they have all of this experience? That's what we need in order to have coverage policies that reflect the best available evidence. We know that you can't have everything that you want at the registration time. It's just the reality of drug development. We totally agree with that. Great. Anyone else have anything they wanted to add on just sort of the votes or the discussion around the votes today before we start talking about some of the more policy nitty-gritty? Okay. Well, appreciate everyone's sort of participation in that. One of the issues that came up as we were reviewing, and it does kind of tie to how we're thinking about the role here. And Emily, I appreciate that you shared your personal story of having been in the clinical trial, but needed to go back on sort of combo therapy. Let's talk about the role of combo therapy. So let's imagine a world where oveporexton is approved. It's approved as a first-line agent for treating narcolepsy. I'd love to start with Tom and Lewis. Talk to me about, is this going to be, imagine insurance barriers don't exist. Let's just do that for this part of the conversation. Is it the first thing that you're going to want to try with every patient that comes in with narcolepsy type 1? Are you going to be looking for opportunities for combination therapy? Are you going to be trying other therapies before you get to oveporexton? Tom, let me start with you.
So I think if you have a therapy that's really targeting the underlying cause, it seems silly to go to something that's more indirect. And so if money were no object and access was easy, if I thought somebody had narcolepsy type 1, I would put them on an orexin agonist first choice. I mean, it's that simple. As it is in the real world, if we can get insurance access, I will want a lot of my patients to try it because I want them to get a sense of like, can they feel better than they are on their current medicines?
Yes. Right. Okay. Lewis, you had some positive body language there. Agree?
Same as like, even with my teenagers, it's like, once they turn like 17 and a half, I'm going to try to like squeak them in. I've done that with some other medications before, like the indication was 18 years and older, but I felt that as soon as like I feel like I can squeak them in, I probably will. But I feel like once we start doing this as trying to use an orexin agonist as a first line medication or the first option, these little details are going to start popping up where we're going to find out that it's not going to be the end all be all because it's we're dosing it twice a day, but it's not a 24-hour disorder. And I think we're gonna find some people, not everyone, but we're gonna find some people with NT1 that they might need something more than that. And there always will be some people that are gonna need some combination therapy, and that's gonna be like the next question, like who are these people that are gonna need combination therapy, and also is combination therapy gonna be superior to just solo orexin agonist, and by how much?
Let's press on that a little bit. And I want to do this for the benefit of Emily and Becky, who are already thinking about how they're going to write their clinical policy for access to this medicine. You could imagine a scenario where if someone is prescribed oveporexton and then a request comes in to add on another therapy, that the payer might go, oh, because oveporexton's not working. So how can we make the coverage policy be reflective of it's working and I still need this? Is it because it's for cataplexy? Is there a way to sort of frame this? Tom, I love that your hand's up already. Please.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about that from a policy perspective?
The improvements in alertness that you see during the day with oveporexton are superior to anything that we have. However, the reductions in cataplexy are good, but not perfect. And so we're seeing 75 to 80% reductions. And so I think it's quite likely that I may have some patients where I want to put them on venlafaxine as well. That's a cheap medicine. I don't anticipate any pushback with that.
Problems there. Yep.
However, I think we don't, at least at this point, really know a lot about the effects of oveporexton on disrupted nighttime sleep. And for some patients with narcolepsy, that can be a real torment. They can get up in the morning and they're just like, oh, I'm exhausted. I feel like I've been dreaming all night. Right. And or they're just waking up a lot spontaneously. And in my mind, this is actually the most challenging thing, because are we gonna prescribe an oxybate for that person, which we know is expensive, and that's a tough one.
And that's a tough one. And Louis, I want to go to you because we don't have evidence to know.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
With all of the, this is not a dig on the Takeda program at all. Like, it's just that we don't know what happens. So Louis, go ahead. Yeah.
And then the other thing was, we're going back to the oxybate, like even though clinically we use oxybate a lot for the disrupted nighttime sleep, that's not an actual FDA indication for the oxybate. And so that's going to require more work on the manufacturers to kind of establish that as a treatment modality. And so it's like, how do we get around that? How do we meet the patient's need when there's not that indication right now? But like Tom said, there might be other options that may be cheaper, but at the same time, considering what would we consider the best option might not be the one that's easily available.
Well, and it says we are going to get to price. It is an ICER meeting after all, so we're absolutely going to talk about price. But that is part of it. And you both illustrated that beautifully in your comments, which is you're not going to have trouble prescribing a generic SSRI because it costs $4 a year or whatever the insanely low price is. But you are going to potentially face insurance barriers for the oxybates, just given the price. And so as we think about the role that everyone's sort of collectively playing here, and, sort of speaking a bit to the sodium oxybate, I know it's an authorized generic, I believe one of the more frequently used formulations, price can be access. And so we can't forget that there's room to move in that space. Emily, thank you for waiting. I appreciated also that you were sort of a case study here for needing more than just oveporexton potentially. So please.
Yeah, and I realize I am just a case study, but it might add some color to kind of talk about my experience.
Please.
And the clinchers for me, it was so hard to decide. I got on the open label because I thought I was probably on the highest dose, but I got on the open label and they gave me the new bottle. But then when I started taking it, I could tell I'd been on the highest dose the whole time, no change. But my challenges were that in the evening the dose wore off and it was like I was unmedicated. And so the cataplexy came back and the nighttime sleep was so bad. I felt lousy when I wake up in the morning, but an hour after I take the med again, I'm just like, boom, I'm on. And I feel great throughout the day. And so it was so hard to decide to give up the feeling great during the day in order to get the stability in cataplexy that I get with the nighttime treatment and stabilizing the disrupted nighttime sleep. So I feel like in thinking about which patients are going to need a nighttime treatment, I think patients with very severe cataplexy, where it comes back in the evening. And I do want to add the caveat that if you could like adjust the dosing into later in the day, or take more than the 2 milligrams, then that might address the evening cataplexy. So I would say, yeah, I mean, Dr. Scammell said it as well. So I think patients with more severe cataplexy are going to need an additional nighttime treatment or something to stabilize their cataplexy, and then the disrupted nighttime sleep.
Thank you. Yes, Tom, please go ahead.
Yeah, so Emily, I think that I doubt that we're going to have access to more than 2 milligrams twice a day, because that's what's been studied, and I suspect that's what the insurance will limit us to. But just like we do with all medicines, I think in the real world we can play around with timing and stuff like that. And so and my point is that it may be possible to get better results than what you were experiencing with the nighttime crash.
Phil, I saw that you had your hand up before. I just want to make sure I didn't miss or give you an opportunity.
Oh, I was just going to speak a little bit to, the nighttime symptoms and the data. So that's some of the data it's going to be at Sleep this year. So,
oh, great. Okay.
it hasn't been published, but to Emily's point, there's personal experiences, and I don't want to negate the fact that maybe they're, from a clinician patient perspective, necessitate the fact that they do need additional medication, whether that be a cheap generic or another medication. And just, I guess my ask in part to the community is let us continue to study that as patients gain experience, and we talk with clinicians and patients that are able to have that experience, so that we can get that out of the public and come up with more information to make better clinical judgment.
That's great. And what I call for in that is this is a new medicine for a rare condition, and we are going to learn more. And so that's often an opportunity for the coverage policies from the insurance side to offer some level of flexibility when it comes to trying to figure out optimum doses, optimum timing, and the potential for combo therapy. But let me put the insurers on the spot. Emily, I'm going to start with you. Do you see any challenges, or where do you see any challenges with trying to have a coverage policy that offers up some of that flexibility while also recognizing that you're going to try and be making coverage policy based on the evidence that we have at this time? You think about that tension a lot. How are you thinking about that in this field?
Yeah, I think it's already been brought up, but I think the combination therapy will probably be if I were to envision the PNT conversation, I think the one with the most discussion. I could envision, some of those caveats that were mentioned, like having severe cataplexy as maybe some of the language that makes it into a policy for allowing combination use. So don't have a crystal ball for my own committee, but I see this as most likely an area of strong discussion.
Yeah. Where do you think the discussion will be around step therapy?
Every plan is different. And again, I can't predict our committee, but I suspect that they will, see the logic associated with this product, which is really to its advantage. And so if I had to guess, I wonder if they would see the logical use of this medication to treat the condition, and that would be in favor against step therapy. But again, every plan is different.
Thanks. Becky, I'm going to go to you next. Phil, I see you. I'll get to you in just one second. Same two questions. Thinking about how you handle the flexibility that clinicians and patients need on the combo therapy side, and how you're also thinking about step therapy.
Yeah, I think that we're going to have similar questions, right? Like what is the appropriate combo therapy? Of course, when we're talking about 2 very expensive, or even 3, I think, very expensive medications without evidence to show that there's any incremental benefit of one, if you add it on to an existing therapy, is going to be challenging. I mean, I think we'll have a lot of questions about what is appropriate. And then as far as step therapy, I mean, I think it seems to me very likely that we would probably have step through like modafinil or very low cost generics. I think the question about step through other higher cost medications is you know, I think there'll be a lot of discussion on it again. That seems less likely, but still something that will be considered.
I would put a plug for both Becky and Emily, and also for Emily and Tammy and your advocacy, that we spent a lot of time talking with different stakeholders now, gosh, 5, 6 years ago, to try to like write down what would a criteria for access to new medicine have to look like. What would it have to look like in order to be fair? How many steps are fair? Like, is it fair to make a patient try a drug they've tried before that's already failed them? Spoiler alert, no. And so, as you're thinking about some of the ways that these questions will be wrestled with the P&T, the Pharmacy and Therapeutics committees, as you're thinking about conversations you might have with some of your clients, sort of the purchasers, yeah, referencing sort of an ideal for how we can do this ethically and fairly, I think goes a long way to making it a little less sort of grinding of the gears that we're often, many of us are feeling with prior authorization, utilization management, etc. Phil, thank you for your patience. Please chime in.
Yeah, certainly. So this is just a little bit in regards to step therapy or some considerations there.
Please.
Thinking about the diagnostic journey and where these patients have been as well, I would ask, to look at the patient's history too in regards to what therapies they may have already been on to treat certain symptoms, whether or not it was regarded specifically as NT1 or not, and how those patients responded. And then maybe just a provocative questions, interested from the physicians and the patients in the room in regards to how you actually defined treatment failure. Because, we're talking about a symptom or two versus a broad spectrum of, the symptomatology that comes from this potential disorder, and what is good enough? Again, a kind of a philosophically hard to answer question, to define what adequates to step therapy.
So can I pick up on that?
There was a siren going. Excuse me, Tom, as I was trying to do a segue into that. I was just going to make a joke that this is turning out to be one of my favorite roundtables because the participants are doing an awesome job of asking other people questions, which is making my job so much easier. So I do want to sort of make sure Tammy and Emily have a chance to ask or answer that clinical as well. Sort of how do we define the drug's not working for the patient? How long does it take, et cetera, so that that can be built into some of the coverage policies. But Tom, please go ahead.
So Phil, I think a short answer is the medicine good enough, right? Is the patient able to accomplish what they need to do? If it's a kid having trouble with school or somebody who's having trouble with their job, can we patch things together sufficiently to basically take care of the crisis? But I mean, maybe, I don't know, others may have different thoughts on this, but it's interesting that there is no, when we're asked, like, has the patient failed the medicine? There doesn't seem to be many rules around that. It's a quality call. But I guess one thing I would just point out about step therapy is I've seen some of the stupidest choices. Like, to get somebody an oxybate, an insurance says you have to fail pitolisant. Well, you know what? It's even more expensive, and its efficacy is less than the oxybate. It's like, I think this issue of ultimately, weighing the benefits and risks of specific medicines as you march, and cost as you march along towards potentially more expensive therapies is important. But I just would plead for a little bit of sense going into some of these.
I will happily echo a plead for sense, and I am happy to be the one that says out loud that sometimes decisions like that may have to do with the size of the rebate that is being offered on one medicine versus another in exchange for formulary status, which is not always the best way to get to a value-based approach, but it is part of the system that we have. Emily, you've been very patient. Please.
No problem. I think it's important that we're sensitive to the implications of step therapy. Like,
Yes.
I tried venlafaxine 20 years ago, and I don't know that I'd be willing to step through it again because of the experience that I had in that it was not effective, and I went up to the highest dose of the extended release, and it took me like 14 months to withdraw from it because of like withdrawal effects like mood effects and rebound cataplexy. And so to have a patient like step through something that's going to put them through terror, especially if they're like a young person, a student like that is losing time in school, etc. Like I think it's important to be sensitive to the impact that the medications can have in going on them and going off of them. And I don't know if I'm like super unique with super sensitive, or if this is an experience that other individuals have. I know there are people who respond well to some of the antidepressants for cataplexy.
And Emily, it doesn't necessarily matter if you're super unique. I mean, I'm sure you're a super unique individual. I mean, of course. But I think that in this case, you want coverage policies to be flexible enough so that the shared decision making between the patient and the clinician can be towards the most evidence-based appropriate care for them. And so we do have that in our fair access criteria. If you've tried a medicine before and it has failed you, you should not have to take it again. I don't care how cheap it is either. Or how expensive, like either way, or what size of the rebate is. And so that's one of the things that we hope comes from a more sort of ethical approach to some of these choices. Lewis, go ahead.
It's also like going back to like, what is treatment failure? Because like I feel like I'm a pretty successful person. I can be awake for the key points of my life and job, but it's difficult. I know it's difficult compared to my peers. No matter like if you compare me to someone else with narcolepsy, I'm doing fantastic. I'm doing great. I'm a success story. But compared to my peers, it's a struggle. It's a struggle to, get us, write papers, to see patients, to do, and so like what metric are going to be using? Because yeah, on paper, it's a success. I'm a success with my current medication, but it's difficult. It's still difficult. I have to use a lot of non-pharmacologic tricks and strategies to get by. And so it's just, trying to, what metric are we going to use to say this the treatment failure is going to be really difficult. And I think you're just going to have to rely on the patient. You just say, yeah, this is good, but I'm limited. And I think that's the core. That's how I measure failure or success.
Right. Well, and I think that point is so important. And I do not envy Emily and Becky as they go back and think about how to write a coverage policy that can reflect that nuance. Because the other thing that came through today in the wonderful testimonies from the patient community is that, and this reminds me of a review we did for chronic migraine a couple of years ago, where a patient said, I did not know how much it sucked until I had an effective treatment. They had accommodated so much. They knew what rooms not to go in with what lights and nowhere with perfume and all of these things that they had changed to make sure they didn't have as many migraines. And then when they had a successful treatment, they were like, oh, I didn't realize. And I felt that from the patient testimonies today. And I also, again, that's not an easy thing to be like, and make sure you certify that they feel less crappy. Like, I mean, there are ways coverage policies can do this where it is physician attestation, and we're not asking for a lot of documentation and proof because we're going to listen to and trust the patient and how they're feeling on those things. But that to me is such an important part of understanding this condition, how accommodating many of the patients have become in order to function. And that does not mean that there isn't more room for them to achieve more by having the underlying cause addressed. Tammy, please.
I agree with everything that was said previously, and we'll only try to add a little bit about step therapy and the potential delay to optimal care and treatment. When I'll use my daughter as an example, when she started on treatment, when she started on modafinil, we saw an improvement and we thought, oh, great, this is working. And it took several months to go, okay, this isn't actually working. And then we add another one or up a dose or try something else. And so you do see benefits, right? You see, and to Dr. Scammell's point that he made earlier, you don't always know what your optimal is when you've been surviving so long, or you do see a minimal improvement. And so step therapy could potentially just, not only that you have to go through several, but you don't actually know what the optimal is until if we can start with something that could give that over the year or year plus of these step therapies, that gives back somebody's life, and especially, somebody that's newly diagnosed.
I'm going to invite Tom Lewis and Phil to answer this next one. This is for me to potentially understand the biology here a little bit more. We heard from patients, we heard from clinical experts in the review that they may cycle through many different therapies because therapies stop working. So to Tammy's point, or it was working for a little bit and then it sort of comes down. So you might need to try something else, or there's a waning effect. From the biological plausibility perspective, do we expect that to happen with oveporexin, or do we have sort of higher expectations here that since it's addressing the deficiency that we wouldn't necessarily see waning? Go ahead, Tom.
So I actually have to say, as a general rule, we don't really see loss of efficacy over time. I think with any medicine, there can be sort of a honeymoon period. And when people, like, for instance, if you look at the placebo effect in where cataplexy is the endpoint, on placebo, people get 30% better. And so just believing in a medicine can make a difference. But then after that little honeymoon is over, that sense of benefit may fade. And so I oftentimes look at, particularly when somebody says it worked for 2 days and then it didn't work anymore, it's like, okay, that's not biologic. That's just they were having a great placebo effect for a couple of days, and then reality hit. In the case of these orexin agonists, it's nice to see that we have some long-term extension data from the phase 2 studies, and then it's being collected now from the phase 3. And on average, at least from the phase 2, there didn't seem to be a loss of efficacy. But having said that, it is an agonist of G protein coupled receptors. And there's at least some precedent with these kind of medicines that you can see some loss of efficacy over time. I think if you were going to see it, you would see it in the first months. I'd also say that you'd see it at high doses. And I think what we're trying to accomplish with these orexin agonists is just to get people to normal orexin signaling, but we're not trying to beat the heck out of the orexin system. And so I think if you keep it in a reasonable range, my guess is people will do fine on a long basis.
Okay. Phil, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I defer to Dr. Scammell and Ortiz on the biological explanation, but as I was just going to go with the phase 2 data that we have, the 6-month data, and we will have long-term extension data from the phase 3 as well. Again, patients are still being treated. So, we'll publish that data as soon as it's readily available to further characterize it. And then the plans, once it's knock on wood that we launch a little bit later on this year, and that we can observe how patients are taking it in the real world and how patients are experiencing this for longer periods of time.
Thank you. Yes, Lewis, please.
So to echo what Dr. Scannell said, it's when you maintain something at a physiologic range, you're not going to get either like downregulation, you shouldn't expect to see downregulation of receptors. And to just put on my internal medicine hat, go think about type 1 diabetes, where if you provide them with insulin at the physiologic range, it should be okay. But if they eat like crap and require increasing doses of insulin, eventually they're going to develop insulin resistance on top of the insulin deficiency. And so with type 1, and then taking that back to sleep, we do see decreasing effects with these medication like traditional stimulants, maybe even modafinil, where we're boosting something beyond physiologic to maintain the alertness. Eventually it's going to start wearing off after several months, a year. And if you take a break on it, sometimes you can regain some of that efficacy because, some receptors are probably going to be downregulated because you're boosting it beyond a physiologic range. And so hopefully at least with type 1 narcolepsy, I'm hopeful that the efficacy is going to maintain because it's just a tiny amount to replace what's missing.
Okay. Thank you for that. Emily, please.
I was just going to add, based on my experience and thinking about the pathophysiology, I think there will be some fine tuning, like with titration. And I'll share that my experience was just like the first 5 days, it was almost like the drug was working for like 24 hours, like awake, 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 can't sleep, can't sleep, can't sleep. But when I take it in the morning, like, I could stay awake for like 2 days straight. So it was just like my receptors were like, wow, we've been waiting so long for this. And so anyway, I think that we will learn a lot about how, people who haven't had their receptors touched for decades respond to a little bit of the medication and like how to optimize it long term.
Thank you, Emily. Tom, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you were on the 2 milligrams twice a day dose from the way you describe it. And I don't think, personally, I'm not going to start anybody on that dose.
Right.
I think we're going to start.
Right.
We do this with all medicines, right? You start low, you dial it up as you need to.
Yep. Perfect. I have a couple of specific questions I wanted to get to, but I also wanted to give you warnings about two things. One is the next section after this is future research needs. We talked a lot about them throughout the day, but we'd love to hear your wish list for things you would like to know. So start thinking about that. The other is that when we end today, you're going to get the chance to tell someone to do something. It can be another actor, it can be somebody on this call, it could be me. Your choice. But what the point is to have a sort of call to action. Like, if this happened, this would make this easier. Or I am desperate for my fellow patients to have information on X. Or, everything be a copay and very little utilization management. I'm not trying to give away anyone's call to action, but you can start thinking about that because you'll all have a chance to offer that. First, I wanted to return to the idea of diagnosis and something that we touched on a little bit today, but just to hear any perspectives on this idea that a trial of oveporexton could potentially be diagnostic. And that given wherever there's access issues to a specialist, to a sleep study, how realistic is that? I don't want to make Becky and Emily break out in hives that people might be trying a potentially expensive medicine, we don't know yet, to diagnose. But is that a reasonable thing that could happen? Louis, can I start with you?
Yeah, and I think it goes to goes back to like the Takeda trials with both NT1, NT2, and idiopathic hypersomnia, where on the lower doses you really didn't get a signal on the other disorders, and so theoretically it's such a cumbersome experience to get diagnosed with narcolepsy with actigraphy followed by an overnight sleep study followed by the nap time study. Then not only is it cumbersome, but the scheduling is a mess and the insurance coverage is a mess. And so theoretically, if you can diagnose it with a 1 week course of the medication, follow up, see how you're doing, great. Or you want to alternate it, just dose them with the medication and do an MWT. That's a little bit more complex, but just a response could be potentially diagnostic and simplify the diagnosis process.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Louis. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off if you had something else to add. Thank you.
No.
Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, so we obviously don't have any research on this, right? We are speculating.
We're speculating.
But before I sort of get into it, I just want to ask Emily, when you took your first dose of oveporexton, which I think was probably 2 milligrams in the morning, how long after did you notice something?
Well, I mean, I was very aware that there's a placebo effect, right? So I'm
Yeah.
like, don't get your hopes up. But for that first dose, you have to stay because they take PK draws. And so I was sitting in the bed and I had a work meeting. I had a work meeting and I was alert for sitting. So I was like, this is strange. This is weird. And so that was like the first time I'm like, but not getting my hopes up. And then I drove from my appointment and I didn't get sleepy between my appointment and the grocery store. But I was like, now it's my nap time and I don't want to miss it if this is my only chance. So I reclined to take a nap and I didn't sleep. So then I was like, this is weird. And it was very clear by that evening. Like I hung out with friends, I went to a baby shower, I didn't have cataplexy, and then I couldn't sleep at night. So
Yeah. So I think that makes that I think this is a medicine, like it works right out of the gate. And so to get to what Louise said a second ago, I don't think you even need to do a 1 week trial. I think you could do a 1 day trial. And if somebody really says something like that, it's like who else is gonna, I can't think of another sleep disorder, particularly if you give a really low dose. I think you would basically have a very compelling Now, it doesn't mean that you need to continue that medicine. It just means that you've proven that this person has exquisitely sensitive orexin receptors, which almost certainly means they have narcolepsy type 1. And so, I could see it as basically being diagnostically useful in that sense. And I was putting together a wish list of things that I would like Takeda or the other orexin agonist companies to do. And I'll go through my list later. But for instance, this would be a really cool one, right? To basically say, okay, take a bunch of people who come in with sleepiness and use this as a like we use a tensilon test for myasthenia,
And or how the Epley maneuver actually works for vertigo, which I recently learned.
Yes.
Sorry, just that I was like,
yeah,
whoop!
no, it works right there and then.
It
and
works right away.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of that in medicine, right? And so other Emily and Becky might be relieved to hear that it isn't a 6-month trial of a medicine to know if it's working, right? So that can be also something that gets incorporated into how we think about coverage policy to know whether or not somebody's a responder, that it's not necessarily a very long time. We won't make it just a day, but I think that's also what we're hearing sort of biologically. It's not necessarily 6 months. Phil, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to give you the opportunity if you wanted to weigh in on this question of diagnostic use or not.
Yeah, I guess I'll defer to the clinicians. I mean, essentially,
fair.
it's the guidelines for now. But as far as like a research topic to move forward with, it's an interesting one for sure.
Absolutely. So the other specific question I wanted to ask was around provider restrictions. Sometimes with new medicines for rare conditions, we see coverage policies that say this can only be prescribed by a neurologist with a specialty in X. And then sometimes we say no provider restrictions. Anyone with prescribing capability can do this. Let me see, Lewis, what do you think?
It's a situation, like it's an expensive medication. I can understand why insurers may want to limit who can prescribe it, but at the same time, it's such a like at this dose, it's such a niche thing, and so the fear would be like, oh, like a primary care, it's like a person comes in that says, oh, I'm just really sleepy and tired, and they don't do any kind of assessment into their sleep history or screen for sleep apnea, and they just like prescribe it. Oh, you must have narcolepsy. Here you go, or this will keep you awake. If the dose should be low enough that they shouldn't get any benefit from it if it is another sleep disorder or it's not a sleep disorder at all. So like obviously it'll be quickly stopped, but then there's always people. I mean, thinking back to my internal medicine days, it's like there are always people that they for whatever reason they want this, and there'll be providers that will want to just get them out of the hair and write whatever, and that can add cost to the system. And I can see that would be a reason to restrict it to sleep providers, but at the same time, maybe not just sleep providers, maybe neurologists, pulmonologists, some like people adjacent to the sleep world that have a better grip on sleep disorders in general, and
yeah,
that can kind of do quality control on the patient before they prescribe it.
Okay. Tammy, I can see sort of both sides of this. Like there's equity issues to making it have no provider restrictions so that everyone can, get, but at the same time, you don't want it being prescribed to people who don't have NT1. Go ahead, Tammy.
Yeah, no, thank you. I agree with what Dr. Ortiz said, and I just want to mention that many in the community aren't seeing expert pulmonologists or neurologists. Many I know of individuals that are seeing a nurse practitioner, and they are currently prescribing medications, and some of them that were comparators in this that we've talked about today have been recently restricted because their insurance requirements now have shifted, and individuals are now looking for new providers. I don't suggest that we, take away all limitations, but the current community without access to, we talked about those more rural populations, the burden of traveling and other things. I think it would be prudent of us to be mindful of who patients are currently seeing and how they're being treated so that they aren't limited further and there's not an additional burden.
We've had policy recommendations in the past that have said, yes, restricted to specialists in these categories with this training, but also available to be prescribed by a general practitioner in consultation with. And so, especially to address sleep specialist deserts or whatever other access challenges may be there. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I think you could sort of nuance the language a little bit around this because, we had a long conversation about equity and access earlier, and it's already a problem.
Right.
And I
So
guess
let's not exacerbate it.
the thing that's I think really crucial here is with the big guns medicines that we have in sleep clinic now, like oxybates, one could make the argument because they have a very high incidence of side effects and they're frankly can be dangerous. You could understand restricting that to people who are more sophisticated providers, but I just think that the efficacy to safety ratio is so strong with the orexin agonists and oveporexon where we have the data. The side of I'm going to go out on a limb here, and unless there's some shockers that we don't know yet, nobody's going to get really badly harmed by oveporexton. I mean, I'm saying that in a very loose way. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe, but there's no real danger signals here, and so I think there's no downside to trying it, and there's a lot of upside. The question is, will it get prescribed in a really irresponsible way? Probably not. The insurance companies can throttle it down in some fashion.
Yeah, no, and that is where we've had this conversation for previous reviews is when there is the potential for harm that a lot of stakeholders have agreed that prescribing should be limited to a specialist because you want to minimize that. So I think that's a really important part of this equation, Tom. Thank you. So Becky and Emily Sau, so how are you thinking about provider restrictions? Is this bubbling to the top for you as you're thinking about clinical policies, Becky?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say our current utilization management programs around narcolepsy medications include a prescriber requirement. It is a broader one, neurologists, psychiatrists, pulmonologists, and it also includes language that's like by or in consultation with. So it is not, I would expect that we would do something very similar for this, just kind of align across the category.
Okay. Emily, what do you think?
I think we're a little bit unique because, we're in Washington and Alaska. Alaska is obviously very rural, and Eastern Washington can actually sometimes be more rural than Alaska. So we don't have any prescriber requirements, and I don't expect that we will for this product either.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. All right, Phil, it's my turn to put you on the spot, but I warned you that I was going to. So we've made it this far without talking too much about price. But we do know that there is a reward that Takeda is seeking for the innovation, and that is part of our capitalist ecosystem, and it drives innovation, and we celebrate that. And we also know we are facing affordability challenges. So why don't you share a little bit with the audience about how you're thinking about pricing for this medicine, knowing that it's still not approved, and you can't tell us exactly what you're going to charge, so I'm not going to make you. But how do you want us to, what do you want us to learn about how Takeda is thinking about the pricing of this medicine?
Yeah, thank you for that. Because I think it's also good to put perspective onto the assumed price that was put within the report and the change from the draft report into the final report that it went up by 43 or 40 some odd percent. So, which was informed by an analyst discussion.
What? Just an analyst estimate that changed. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, that was not a Takeda, informed pricing in there.
Yep.
As you mentioned, with any therapeutic product that's under development, it's premature for us to go to discuss pricing in advance of an approval. We don't have a label yet. With that said, Takeda will determine the appropriate price for oveporexton based on our pricing philosophy, which essentially it reflects our strong commitment to bring the right options to patients who are going to benefit from them, seeking broad access. We'll thoughtfully work to ensure that the list price of the medication reflects the value of an innovation a treatment brings to patients, caregivers, the healthcare system, and society, as well as our efforts to discover, develop, research, and deliver new medications to address patients' needs in the future. So more to come. We're not that far, hopefully, from our launch, in which we'll be able to share that price. But just just want to ensure everybody that Takeda does this in a really thoughtful and meaningful way. And we will for this product as well.
We appreciate that, Phil. Thank you. And I know there's not a lot you can share at this stage. I will take this opportunity just to share a few of the numbers from our report, just to sort of put things a little bit in context, because we are talking about a rare condition. We have different conversations at ICER about and at our meetings about fair pricing as it relates to rare conditions. Very prevalent conditions, drugs that offer a little bit of benefit for patients, drugs that offer big benefit for patients. And, the underlying philosophy is that if you price the drug reflective of the benefit that it's delivering to patients, that's a great starting point to put a whole bunch of pressure on the system to make sure patients are getting affordable access. And that's that voluntary de-escalation of an arms race of higher and higher prices and more access restrictions and more cost sharing for patients. And I just think we're at that ceiling. So like we need to be ratcheting it down. And so as we were thinking about this, we offered up benchmark prices against several different comparators. So whether you think the appropriate comparator is no treatment, or you think it's sodium oxybate or modafinil and the SSRI, you can see how our math plays out. It's actually a pretty big range. And so as Takeda's out negotiating with payers, as payers are looking to an independent assessment of value, you get to sort of pick sort of which one you think makes the most sense, both clinically and economically. And so our benchmark prices go as high as $199,000 a year, which is a little bit of a premium over the current, at least average net price for the generic of sodium oxybate, the authorized generic. So I'm just kind of putting that out there, that is a price that reflects value and potentially could offer an opportunity for payers to respond with fewer access restrictions, fewer utilization management, less cost sharing, and it might make Tom and Lewis and their staff happy that they have less paperwork. And I know it'll make Emily and Tammy and their communities happy to also have less paperwork. And I thank you all for letting me stand on my pricing soapbox for just a moment as we start to wrap up our roundtable today. We did want to give an opportunity for some research needs. And so I'd love to hear sort of rapid fire what you're hoping to have happen from the future research of this therapy. Tom, you said you had a list, so I'm going to go to you to start us off. You're still on mute, Tom. Tom, you're on mute.
One thing that came up in this morning's conversation, which I think is really crucial, is head-to-head comparisons. And I think it could be done a couple ways. One is it needs to be done in a formal, phase 3 type study, where you take some reasonable thing like modafinil or something like that, and you ask, how does this fare on the MWT and weekly cataplexy rate versus oveporexton? And I think that would really help inform pricing, because it gives you a sense of relative cost and relative benefit.
Right.
We need to see PD studies. This is a pediatric disease, right? And then I would say the population that is most affected is these young teens and adolescents. I would also like to, we talked before, and that's kind of a little bit of a Hail Mary thing. Wouldn't it be cool if you could try this in a diagnostic way? Sure, that sounds like a phase 4 thing. But I guess one thing that would be nice that I think could potentially be done would be to actually have a real world long-term extension, where if patients do need to go on venlafaxine or they do need to go on an oxybate, that you could basically follow people for a year or so after starting oveporexton and just ask, well, what happens? Because I think that kind of data would help inform. It would be really useful for clinicians. It would be useful for patients to understand where it delivers and where it doesn't. And ultimately, it may be helpful for insurers to get a sense of, what else are we going to have to pay for along with this? I guess I think there's going to be some people who do great on oveporexton alone, but
Right.
Nothing's perfect. And then we may have to sort of fill in the cracks a little bit with other medicines.
Thank you. That was a great list. Any other additions to the list?
That's it for me.
Thank you, Tom. Tammy, yes.
Yep, I 100% agree. Pediatrics is going to be very important, and I will throw out a plug for the community who is wanting to see those nighttime combinations with orexin agonists. But my soapbox right now is going to be pregnant and lactating populations. And Emily and I have had a lot of discussion about pregnancy registries and how to, growing your family is only effective if you have, we've talked about that a little bit, but if you have to go off of medications to do that, you still are limited. So I'd love to see some pregnancy data.
Thank you, Tammy. Emily Clegg, Barker, excuse me. I only
Tammy?
halfway through realized there were two Emilys. I don't know what's wrong with me today. Yes, Dr. Barker, please.
Tammy climbed onto the soapbox before I had a chance. But the hat I usually wear is to advocate for the pregnancy and early parenting population. So similarly, and we'd love to have offline conversations about some of our ideas and hopes for research of these agents in that population and impact of exposure during pregnancy and preconception.
Great.
Other things, so yes, about combination treatments. Of course, when I was on the trial, I was like, holy cow, if I had an oxybate, I would be like myself again. And so understanding how those combinations look, but I'm also familiar with like the orexin antagonist. And I was like, geez, if I could just turn this off at night, I wonder how I'd do. So I mean, that's kind of out there, but I'm kind of curious about whether those could be used in combination to help with the insomnia. And then dosing and the and formulation, like the thought of an extended release, because if it could be out of my system by the end of the day, but not like a cliff, then it might help with the evening symptoms and prepping for sleep time.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Barker. Lewis. Oh, you're on mute, Lewis.
I had a few ideas. So one would be kind of like trying to get like an overview of like the general narcolepsy population pre-post the release of orexin agonists. So like biopsychosocial markers like how much money they're making or how far they got in their education, what other comorbidities they have. And then we take a snapshot before the release, and then we get a snapshot maybe 5 years after the release. And then we see like a meaningful difference, even if they're not necessarily on an orexin agonist, we kind of know that some of them will be. And if we see like kind of compare what that population looked like before and after, if there's like an improvement, we can kind of start digging in further to say that this is making a meaningful change in their lives and like society as a whole, that these people are in a better place than since this population is in a better place since the release of this medication. The other thing that you can look at is like in number of medication changes before they're on their stable regimen. Or yeah, and then finally the other one would be this is always like the fear, like, oh, like I think it's based on me, like it's like because throughout my life, I've always like, what if it's not narcolepsy? What if I'm really am lazy or like I'm fake? Like, and so like part of me, I even like I always have doubts about myself. I always also have doubts about the patients that I diagnose. And I suspect that we are going to have people who are diagnosed with NT1 and they're not going to be responders to these medications. And I think it's going to be important to understand who are these people, what's going on, do they have NT1, and is it just like another mechanism of disease, or were they misdiagnosed, and what led to that misdiagnosis? And I think that's going to be really interesting, and I think that's going to pop up once we start treating people with this. They're going to be people that are not going to be responding, and we need to figure out why.
That's great. Phil, I appreciate you were taking notes. I don't know if everyone else was seeing that, but that made me smile. So thank you for taking copious notes during that section. But we are going to switch now.
Well, I do want to say a lot of things that
yes.
people are talking about, we're talking about as well. So,
awesome.
But there are part of the reason with the notes is there's a couple new things in here too, but essentially just an ask for the ideas to keep coming.
Great. No, I love that, Phil. Thank you. So sadly, we are almost out of time, but we are going to give everybody the opportunity for a call to action, what it is you would like to see out of this ecosystem so that we are getting closer to affordable access for patients and the health system. And so I'm going to start with Becky. Becky, what's your call to action?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I want someone brilliant to solve all of our healthcare problems. I feel like we just need a genius to step in and figure this out for us. But
maybe AI, Becky.
right?
Maybe AI. We'll find out.
I feel like that's not going to happen anytime soon. So, I mean, really, I think it's the call to action is to us, like for all of us to figure out how to make everything work a little better. We need better research that guides us to the right therapies. We need, payers to figure out how to make the costs as low as they can, but still allow access without, undue burden. We need prescribers to be being aware of drug pricing and getting the most value out of the medications that we have. So it's we're all in, I think.
Thank you, Becky. I appreciate that. Dr. Sao from Primera.
Yeah, I just want to say a big thank you for the patients and patient advocates for sharing their perspectives, and also Phil and Takeda for participating. Really appreciate your thoughtful comments. My mind always goes to outcomes-based agreements, and it just seems like this is a good candidate. This product is a good candidate for that. And Lewis's comments just made me think discontinuation, right? Like it's easy, money back guarantee. So, my mind is always churning with those ideas, but just my call is just for more creative ways to work together.
Thank you, Emily. Other Dr. Emily Barker, what's your call to action?
Sure. Yeah, it's been great to be here, and I want to express appreciation for putting patient and patient experience at the center, and hope that can continue to be a big part of the picture. And we've shared a lot about our experience that I think has given a good picture. I guess my call is to payers, and just my hope that the medication, the orexin agonists, are not seen as an alternative to other daytime wake promoting agents, and the uniqueness of them targeting the actual deficiency that we experience and the transformation that we can have because that is restored, that it's not something you can do with modafinil or oxybate. And so I hope that it can be viewed differently, a first in class from the payer perspective.
Thank you, Emily. Tammy.
I always love going after Emily because she puts things in a very well-framed manner for me. So for me, today's discussion has the power to expand what is possible for people living with narcolepsy, to help them drive safely, to succeed in school or work, to care for their families and participate fully in their communities. In the last 10 years since my daughter was diagnosed, we've seen the community move from merely surviving to the hope of thriving because of innovation and access to treatment. So I ask you to recognize the extraordinary value that these therapies bring and help ensure that hope, opportunity, and quality of life remain within reach of every person living with narcolepsy. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Tammy. Tom. You're on mute again, Tom.
I can't beat that. Tammy, that was like a lovely sermon. Your call to action. Yeah, I think we did. I guess the big thing is we want to get the medicine to the people who need it most. So I want to see results from a pediatric trial as soon as possible. I want to see that this is a medicine that we can get to patients without having to step through other meds that are less effective. Because time's passing, as I said earlier. We don't want to screw around for a year.
Thank you, Tom. Lewis.
I hate going last, or because I don't know, or close to last, because I don't know how to add on to this. These are great calls to action. I think that getting the medication to children is important. Getting the diagnosis earlier is important as well. Figuring out new ways of diagnosis so that we can start therapy as soon as possible is also going to be very important as well. That's going to involve not just the sleep specialists, but other physicians and ancillary medical professions to recognize that there's a sleep disorder. And my main call to action is that we need to, the medical community needs to do a better job of recognizing not just narcolepsy, just a sleep disorder in general, to get the ball rolling for the diagnosis. And I feel that we can have the best medications in the world, but if you don't get diagnosed, you're never going to get treated.
Thank you, Lewis. And Phil, last word to you.
Yeah, everybody's already said it, but I would just say broad, not disadvantaged access would be the ask. We're not looking to be in front of anything. We just want it to be an option available for patients and clinicians as they help make decisions on the best path for them.
I'll end with deep appreciation to all of you. Many, if not most of you, have been with us all day. Phil, I'm thinking of emailing your boss to say you need hazard pay because you did the modeling presentation, the public comment, and the policy roundtable with ICER today. So thank you for that. My big take home, my big call to action is we have an opportunity. This is building a bit on Becky. We have an opportunity to take friction out of the system. We can make different choices about how we have created this infrastructure that often causes frustration, that often leads to not the best outcomes for patients. And so why don't we focus on taking friction out of the system? We are very happy to be contributing to that by bringing stakeholders together for this type of conversation and also producing information to help inform that fair price, fair access grand bargain that we think we can achieve. But my thanks again to this esteemed group for spending time with us. With that, I'm going to invite the Midwest CEPAC to come back on camera and throw things back to Rachel for final reflections.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think the term deep appreciation is appropriate, and what an incredible, thoughtful set of conversations, especially the perspectives from the patient representatives and advocates we've heard today. So with that, I'll go around the virtual room with the Midwest CPAC. Sometimes we say that we're going to offer one long sentence with a semicolon, but we'll be brief in our final reflections. So let's go alphabetically. Eric, would you lead us off?
Sure. Thanks to our patient partners. I think we've really enjoyed your contributions to this particular topic. I think in part because it highlights a hidden issue regarding the level of disability that comes with this particular condition. So thank you for your contributions.
Thank you. Kurt?
Yeah, again, special thanks to our patients providing their perspectives. Very, very helpful. I would just reiterate that we'd love to expedite the clinical studies in the children. In a way, it's kind of surprising that that wasn't put first off. But my unanswered questions are, what are the drug interactions? Is it going to be a controlled med? And probably not. But what is going to happen there? And then, of course, what are the long-term safety published data? So that's all I had. Thank you.
Don?
Yeah, it's nice to be in a place where I can talk. I assume you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. All of the obvious patient experts, the policy roundtable people, the ICER staff, as usual. This is a great opportunity. I will say that there are more unanswered questions for me than there were that we answered. And for example, this business of comorbidity and the potential effect of managing those more effectively, knowing that that is not necessarily going to be something that a primary care physician can do with someone with a rare disease. It's not to say that that's not important, but there are a number of questions. And I noticed too that the AASM guideline hasn't been updated for about 5 years, and it just has recommendations. I think you need some more discipline in your evidence evaluation. There are performance measures. I don't think they're in use. I think there's a lot of opportunity here to look at things like lifestyle modification too, rather than just focusing on pharmacologic therapy. So I think that this is an opportunity for you to take advantage of, not instead of, but in addition to what we're talking about, moving the needle on those issues too, because I think it will help because these are complex patients. Thank you.
Thank you. Inga?
Yeah, thanks. This was great. I can only echo what everybody has said so far, and thanking everyone for this really insightful discussion. I mean, I lived through the Hep C thing where this was amazing to get those cures and those large effect estimates, so I can understand why our sleep colleagues are very excited about this. Then on the other hand, that also taught me that we should probably not get used to a $1,000 pill. And at $250,000, we're coming close to the $700 a day mark. And, that is just not going to be affordable particularly for capitated health system. It's not gonna work initially. So I'm hoping that there will be, I was very encouraged that somebody said there was other companies working on this. Hopefully we'll see a lot of work here and that this will bring down the cost. But again, thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Diane?
Yeah, thank you very much to all the patients. I think the patient testimonies were very powerful. I think in terms of the call to action, I echo what's being said. I think we need to invest more in research in getting effective treatment. What the question that I've been thinking throughout the session, and I think this came up when we were answering questions, was this disease is disrupting daily life of a lot of people and how it is actually leading to, I think one of the patients was talking about losing the job. They can't hold on to the job, but that means losing a job means also you lose insurance, and then losing insurance is access to care. I think Tim can elaborate on this thing. So I feel like it's a cycle of this thing, right? Because when you need the access to care, the treatment, and if you lose job and you lose insurance, yes, you can argue about getting on public insurance, but that's a different question, right? How difficult it is, or etc. So yeah, that's a question I've been debating about, how this is like a sort of a cycle around, and we need to address those issues. But thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this. I enjoyed it. Thank you again very much to the patients for your testimonies.
Thank you. Jill?
First, Rachel, great job today. For everybody, thank you for participating. I think your voices remind us why this important and transparent work matters and help guide us towards better decisions. Thank you for letting me be a part of it. ICER, y'all did a great job as well.
We couldn't hear you, Rachel. I think you said Brad.
Oh, okay. I didn't.
Apologies.
I was waiting. Okay, sorry. Well, after today, I certainly have a better appreciation of the burden of narcolepsy. My son actually had a sleep study. Fortunately, he didn't have it. Now knowing I'm feel much more fortunate that he didn't have that. Just had daytime sleepiness. But I'll tell you, I was really encouraged by the clinical trial results. This drug really looks like it's can have a really meaningful impact on those with narcolepsy. I appreciate Phil for being here. It's not often when we have these that the manufacturer or sponsor shows up. So, and I appreciated his participation in this. At the end, I hope our collective efforts help the payers and the manufacturer come at a price that, finds that sweet spot of affordability and rewards that innovation. Thank you guys. And of course, ICER staff did a good job preparing the report.
Thank you, Brad. Tim?
Yeah, thanks so much. Definitely so moved by the patient perspective. And so I appreciate you being here. Brad stole my thunder. I really wanted to thank Phil for being here in the manufacturing perspective. We haven't always had that. So I think that was really important, and I encourage all the manufacturers to be here in all these meetings. I will just, several people have said it. I said it several times. I'm concerned about equity, access, insurance. So I'll just say that again. Just a final comment. This is my semicolon, Rachel. I would, I wish we could do more, and I think we do it sometimes here without all the available evidence that I wish we could have on comparisons, on pricing and all that. So we do the best we can without that, but I just wish we had more. But thanks to the ICER staff for all they do.
Reem?
Well, hard to find additional things to say, but certainly want to echo the deep gratitude for everybody here, especially the patients who've again not shared just their perspective, but gave us a really rounded idea of what does this mean. Appreciate the manufacturer being here also throughout. And maybe the one thing I'm going to say is a quote from a patient. It is wonderful when we find new treatments that work. The only thing worse than not having a treatment is having a treatment and not be able to access it. So whatever we do, this one works. It looks like it works. Let's make sure that the patient gets access to it. And Rachel, thank you for your leadership and sharing us things.
Jimmy?
I am, going to follow everyone and really, really express deep gratitude to the patients and the caregiver as well. Really thank you for painting such a vivid picture of what it's like to live with a complex disease like narcolepsy. I'll admit I'm unfortunately one of the ones that completely misunderstood the disease. So it was really great to understand what it's like. And I'll leave it one thing. I think one of the themes of today was uncertainty in terms of long-term efficacy or in terms of patients building up tolerance. But it's important to remember that patients live with uncertainty every single day with a disease like this. So the data and the testimony from the patients show that this is obviously quite efficacious. So even if it's in the short term, which is probably not going to be according to the clinical expert, it is a win for patients. Thank you.
Stuart?
Well, I'm struck by the memory of a couple of comments that were made by our patient advocates and patients. Audelia and Emily struggled to describe this sensation of normality that kind of came forth with the effect of the drug. In Audelia's case, it was a patient she knew, but Emily was a personal story. So when a drug shows this kind of promise, that kind of testimony is what should drive our excitement and also our commitment to access. And congratulations, Rachel. It was a great job.
Thank you. I echo my colleagues' thanks to everyone on the ICER team, our clinical experts, and particularly our patient experts, especially Emily and Tammy, for all of their work as we prepared for this meeting. It's my first time as chair of this committee, but I couldn't have done it without all of you being so thoughtful and offering such helpful perspectives. My sort of last comment, I find myself of two minds. I keep thinking about something Dr. Ortiz said during our voting session. I worry it's going to be harder to do the kinds of comparative effectiveness studies going forward precisely because of the existence of this drug that really seems to act on this pathway that's so important to the disease. At the same time, what an amazing step forward that we do now have a treatment that's responsive here. And so it's okay to hold both of those thoughts in our heads at once. So with that, back to the ICER team to adjourn us today.
Yes, I'm happy to take us home. Rachel, congratulations on chairing your first meeting. Thank you very much. My gratitude extends to the entire Midwest CEPAC. The recording of this meeting will be on our website next week. The final report that will reflect the policy roundtable conversation, the votes, the deliberation should be published right around June 8th. All of the materials will be available on our website. With that, we do get to adjourn today's meeting of the Midwest CEPAC. We really appreciate everybody's contributions and collaboration. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Sarah, thank you, Rachel. Good to see everybody.
Take care.